The fluorescent lights buzzed softly in the empty hallway of Riverside Community Center as Marcus Williams pushed his cleaning cart toward the main entrance. It was nearly closing time on a Thursday evening, and most people had already gone home. Marcus had worked as a janitor at the center for almost 12 years now, and he knew every corner of the building like the back of his hand. At 53 years old, his joints ached a bit more than they used to, but he never complained. This job put food on the table and helped him support his daughter through college. As Marcus bent down to pick up a crumpled paper near the water fountain, he heard the front door open. A woman stumbled inside, her clothes dirty and torn at the sleeves. Her gray hair hung in messy tangles around her face, and her shoes were so worn that her toes peeked through the holes. She looked around nervously, clutching a small plastic bag to her chest. Marcus had seen homeless people come through these doors before, usually looking for warmth or a bathroom, and his heart always went out to them. The woman's eyes were red and swollen, as if she had been crying for hours. She moved slowly toward one of the benches in the lobby and sat down heavily, as though every step had drained what little energy she had left. Marcus watched her for a moment, noticing how her hands trembled as she opened her plastic bag and pulled out a half-eaten sandwich. She stared at it for a long moment before taking a small bite, chewing slowly like someone who hadn't eaten in days. Marcus set down his mop and walked over to the vending machines near the lobby. He pulled out his wallet and fed a few dollar bills into the machine, pressing the buttons for a bottle of water and a pack of crackers. The machine hummed and dropped the items into the slot below. He gathered them up and walked over to where the woman sat. She looked up at him with startled eyes, as if expecting him to tell her to leave. Instead, Marcus smiled gently and held out the water and crackers. The woman stared at the items in his hands, then looked up at his face, searching for something. Perhaps she was trying to understand why a stranger would show her kindness. Her lower lip quivered and fresh tears began to roll down her weathered cheeks. She reached out with shaking hands and took the offerings, whispering a barely audible thank you. Marcus nodded and told her she could stay as long as she needed, at least until he finished his shift in about an hour. The woman clutched the water bottle like it was made of gold. She unscrewed the cap and took a long drink, and Marcus could see the relief wash over her face. He went back to his cleaning duties but kept a watchful eye on her from across the lobby. Something about her presence tugged at his heart in a way he couldn't quite explain. She didn't seem like the typical person who wandered in from the streets. There was something different in her eyes, a depth of sadness that spoke of recent tragedy rather than long-term hardship. After about 20 minutes, Marcus finished mopping the main hallway and decided to check on the woman again. She had finished the crackers and was sitting quietly, staring at the floor. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. He asked if she was all right, if there was anyone he could call for her. The woman looked up at him with those tired red eyes and shook her head. Her voice was hoarse when she finally spoke, telling him that she had nowhere to go and no one to call. Marcus felt his chest tighten with sympathy. He thought about his own daughter, safe in her college dorm, and wondered what had happened to bring this woman to such a desperate place. Without thinking too much about it, he asked if she had eaten a proper meal recently. When she shook her head again, Marcus made a decision. He told her to wait right there and walked to the small staff room where he kept his dinner. He had packed a turkey sandwich, an apple, and some chips for his evening break. He brought the entire bag back to her and placed it on the bench beside her. The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. She tried to refuse, saying she couldn't take his food, but Marcus insisted. He told her he could always grab something on his way home, that he wanted her to have it. The truth was that money was tight, and he had been looking forward to that meal, but seeing this woman's suffering made his own hunger seem unimportant. She finally accepted the bag and opened it with trembling fingers. As she bit into the sandwich, tears streamed down her face again, and she thanked him over and over. Marcus sat down on the bench across from her, giving her space but wanting to make sure she was okay. He introduced himself and told her a bit about his work at the community center. He didn't ask her personal questions or pry into her situation. He simply talked to her like she was a human being worthy of respect and dignity, not someone to be pitied or ignored. The woman listened quietly as she ate, and slowly her body began to relax. The tension in her shoulders eased and the panic in her eyes dimmed just a little. When she finished eating, the woman told Marcus her name was Eleanor. She spoke softly, her words measured and careful, as if she wasn't used to talking about herself. She explained that she had lost everything recently, though she didn't go into details. Her voice cracked when she mentioned that she had been living on the streets for the past 2 weeks, trying to figure out what to do next. She said she felt invisible, that people walked past her like she didn't exist. But Marcus had seen her, had treated her with kindness, and that meant more to her than he could ever know. Marcus listened without judgment. He told Eleanor that everyone falls on hard times, that there was no shame in needing help. He mentioned a few local shelters and resources that might be able to assist her, writing down addresses on a piece of paper from his cart. Eleanor took the paper gratefully and folded it carefully, tucking it into her pocket. She thanked Marcus again, her voice stronger now, and told him that he had restored a bit of her faith in humanity. Those words settled deep in Marcus's heart, reminding him why he always tried to be kind, even when life was hard. As Marcus's shift came to an end, he didn't want to just leave Eleanor sitting in the lobby alone. He walked with her to the door and checked to make sure she knew where the nearest shelter was located. It was only a few blocks away, and he offered to walk her there, but Eleanor declined gently. She said she needed to do this part on her own, that his kindness had already given her the strength she needed to take the next step. Marcus understood and respected her decision. Before Eleanor left, she turned to Marcus one last time. She looked directly into his eyes and told him that what he had done tonight mattered more than he realized. She said that sometimes one act of kindness could change everything, could remind someone that they were still worth caring about. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat as he watched her walk out into the cool evening air. He hoped she would be safe, that she would find her way to a better situation. Marcus finished locking up the community center and headed to his old pickup truck in the parking lot. As he drove home through the quiet streets, he thought about Eleanor and wondered about her story. What had happened to bring her to that point? Where was her family? He said a quiet prayer for her safety and hoped their paths might cross again someday. He had no idea that their brief encounter would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have possibly imagined. 3 weeks passed since Marcus had met Eleanor at the community center. He thought about her often, especially during his evening shifts when the building grew quiet and empty. He wondered if she had made it to the shelter, if she had found help, or if she was still struggling somewhere on the streets. Every time the front door opened during those late hours, a small part of him hoped it might be her, that he could check on how she was doing. But she never returned, and eventually Marcus convinced himself that maybe she had found the help she needed and moved on to better circumstances. Meanwhile, Marcus's own life continued with its familiar struggles. His daughter called him one Tuesday evening with news that made his stomach drop. She needed money for textbooks and lab fees that she hadn't anticipated. The amount she mentioned was more than Marcus had in his savings account. He told her not to worry, that he would figure something out. But after he hung up the phone, he sat at his kitchen table with his head in his hands. He had already been working extra hours cleaning offices on weekends to make ends meet. He wasn't sure where this additional money would come from. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the community center earlier than usual. His supervisor, a stern woman named Mrs. Patterson, called him into her office before he could even get his cart ready. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he walked down the hallway. Being called into the office was never a good sign. When he entered, Mrs. Patterson was sitting behind her desk with a tight expression on her face. She told him that budget cuts were forcing them to reduce hours for all staff members. Starting next month, Marcus would lose 10 hours from his weekly schedule. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. Those 10 hours represented money he desperately needed, especially now with his daughter's expenses. He tried to stay calm as he asked if there was any way to avoid the cuts, maybe by taking on additional responsibilities. Mrs. Patterson shook her head firmly. The decision had been made by the board, and there was nothing she could do about it. She told Marcus she was sorry, but that was simply how things had to be. As Marcus left her office, he felt a weight settle on his shoulders that made it hard to stand up straight. During his lunch break that day, Marcus sat alone in the staff room and tried to figure out his finances. He pulled out a worn notebook where he kept track of his bills and expenses. No matter how he calculated it, losing those hours meant he would fall short each month. He would have to find another job to fill the gap, but at his age and with his limited education, options were scarce. The thought of disappointing his daughter, of not being able to support her dreams, made him feel like he was failing as a father. That evening, As Marcus was emptying trash bins near the administrative offices, he noticed an envelope taped to one of the doors with his name written on it in elegant handwriting. He looked around, confused, and carefully pulled the envelope down. Inside was a letter written on expensive-looking paper. The message was brief but puzzling. It thanked him for his kindness and asked him to come to an address downtown the following Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. The letter was signed simply with the initial E. Marcus read the letter 3 times, trying to make sense of it. The only person he could think of with that initial was Eleanor, the homeless woman he had helped weeks ago. But how would she have known where he worked? And why would she want him to come to an address downtown? The whole thing felt strange, but something in his gut told him this was legitimate. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket, deciding he would go and see what this was about. Saturday arrived with gray skies and a slight drizzle. Marcus put on his best clothes, which consisted of a button-down shirt he usually wore to church, and his only pair of dress pants. He drove his old truck downtown, following the address on the letter. When he arrived, he found himself in front of a tall office building with gleaming glass windows and a modern design. The building looked expensive and important, the kind of place where powerful people worked. Marcus checked the address 3 times to make sure he had the right location. In the lobby, Marcus approached the reception desk, where a young woman in a professional suit greeted him with a bright smile. He nervously explained that he had received a letter asking him to come to this address. The receptionist checked her computer and nodded, telling him that he was expected on the 23rd floor. She directed him to a set of elevators and told him to have a good day. Marcus stepped into the elevator, his heart pounding. He had no idea what was waiting for him upstairs. The elevator doors opened to reveal a spacious reception area with modern furniture and expensive-looking art on the walls. Another receptionist, this one an older gentleman with kind eyes, greeted Marcus by name and asked him to follow. They walked down a quiet hallway lined with offices until they reached a large wooden door at the end. The receptionist knocked twice and then opened the door, gesturing for Marcus to enter. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped inside. The office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. Behind a large mahogany desk sat a woman in an elegant business suit. It took Marcus a moment to recognize her, because she looked so different from the person he had met at the community center. But those eyes, tired and sad that night, now clear and focused, belonged to Eleanor. She stood up as Marcus entered, a warm smile spreading across her face. She looked healthy and well-groomed, her gray hair styled professionally, her clothes clearly expensive. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Eleanor walked around her desk and approached him with her hand extended. She thanked him for coming and invited him to sit in one of the comfortable leather chairs near the window. Marcus sat down slowly, still trying to understand what was happening. Eleanor took the chair across from him and explained that she owed him the truth about who she really was and why she had been on the streets that night they met. Eleanor's voice was steady as she told her story. She was not actually homeless, but the mother of a billionaire who had built a technology empire from nothing. Her son, Richard, had worked hard his entire life to create his company and had become incredibly successful. Eleanor had lived a comfortable life because of his success, but over the past few years she had noticed something troubling. Richard had changed. The kind, generous boy she had raised had become cold and distant, focused only on money and power. He treated people poorly, especially those he considered beneath him. Eleanor continued her story, explaining that she had tried talking to her son about his behavior, but he dismissed her concerns. He told her she didn't understand the business world, that kindness was weakness in his industry. Eleanor became deeply worried about the man her son was becoming. She made a difficult decision to test something. She wanted to see how people treated others when they thought no one important was watching. She disguised herself as a homeless person and spent time on the streets, experiencing firsthand how society treated its most vulnerable members. For 2 weeks, Eleanor had been invisible to most people. She was ignored, avoided, and sometimes treated with outright cruelty. People crossed the street to avoid her. Store owners shooed her away from their entrances. She experienced hunger, fear, and a profound loneliness that shook her to her core. She had been about to give up on her experiment, convinced that compassion had died in the modern world, when she stumbled into the community center and met Marcus. His simple act of kindness, giving her food and water and treating her with dignity, had renewed her faith in humanity. Eleanor leaned forward in her chair, her eyes glistening with emotion. She told Marcus that he had no idea how much his kindness meant to her that night. In her darkest moment, when she felt invisible and worthless, he had seen her as a person deserving of respect. He had given her his own dinner without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. That selfless act had reminded her that good people still existed in the world, people who helped others simply because it was the right thing to do. Marcus listened to Eleanor's story in stunned silence. He couldn't believe that the desperate woman he had helped was actually the mother of one of the richest men in the country. He felt overwhelmed by the revelation, his mind racing with questions. Eleanor seemed to understand his confusion and gave him time to process everything. She stood and walked to her desk, returning with a folder that she handed to Marcus. She told him to open it. Inside the folder, Marcus found documents that he struggled to understand at first. Eleanor explained gently that she wanted to thank him properly for his kindness. She had set up a college fund that would cover all of his daughter's remaining tuition, books, and expenses. She had also arranged for a significant monthly stipend to be paid to Marcus for the next 10 years, ensuring he would never have to worry about losing work hours or struggling to pay bills. The amount she mentioned made Marcus's head spin. It was more money than he had ever imagined having. Marcus stared at the documents in his hands, his vision blurring with tears. He tried to speak but couldn't find the words. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. Eleanor watched him with a gentle expression, understanding the shock that must be coursing through him. She told him that he deserved this and so much more, that his kindness had been worth far more than any amount of money could represent. But she wanted to make his life easier, to give him the security that a good man like him should have. Finally, Marcus found his voice. It came out shaky and thick with emotion. He told Eleanor that he didn't help her that night expecting anything in return. He had simply done what he thought was right, what any decent person should do. Eleanor nodded and said she knew that, which was exactly why she wanted to help him. She explained that true kindness, the kind that expects nothing in return, was the rarest and most valuable thing in the world. She had spent 2 weeks searching for it and had almost given up hope until she met him. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. He asked Eleanor why she had gone through such an extreme test, living on the streets and putting herself in danger. Eleanor's expression grew serious as she settled back into her chair. She explained that her son, Richard, needed to learn an important lesson about humanity and compassion. She had tried for years to talk to him, to show him that his wealth came with responsibility, but he wouldn't listen. He treated employees like numbers on a spreadsheet and saw poor people as lazy or worthless. Eleanor revealed her larger plan to Marcus. She had documented her experience on the streets through a small hidden camera she had carried with her. She had recorded the cruelty and indifference she encountered, but she had also recorded Marcus's kindness. She intended to show this footage to her son and to use it as a wake-up call. She wanted Richard to understand that his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him, had been treated like garbage by most people but had been shown genuine compassion by a janitor who had very little to give. The weight of what Eleanor was telling him began to sink in. Marcus realized he had become part of something much bigger than a simple act of kindness. He was now connected to this powerful family and their internal struggle. He felt nervous about being thrust into such an unfamiliar world. Eleanor must have seen the worry on his face because she reached across and gently touched his hand. She assured him that he didn't need to do anything except accept her gratitude. She would handle everything with her son. Marcus took a deep breath and asked Eleanor what she hoped would happen with Richard. Would showing him the footage really change his mind? Eleanor admitted she wasn't certain, but she had to try. She explained that Richard hadn't always been cold and uncaring. When he was young, he had been sensitive and kind, always wanting to help others. But success had changed him, hardening him into someone she barely recognized. She hoped that seeing his own mother's experience would crack through the walls he had built around his heart. As they talked, Marcus learned more about Eleanor's life. She told him about raising Richard as a single mother after his father died. When Richard was only 7 years old, she had worked multiple jobs to keep them afloat, often going without so her son could have what he needed. She had encouraged his intelligence and drive, never imagining that his success would ultimately distance him from the values she had tried to instill. The pain in her voice when she spoke about their strained relationship was evident. Eleanor shared that Richard hadn't known about her experiment on the streets. She had told him she was taking a personal retreat to think about things. He had barely seemed to notice her absence, too consumed with his business deals and acquisitions. That indifference had hurt Eleanor deeply, confirming her fears that she had lost her son to his ambition and wealth. She hoped her drastic action would force him to confront what kind of person he had become. Marcus listened carefully, his heart aching for this mother who clearly loved her son despite their difficulties. He understood that kind of unconditional love because he felt it for his own daughter. He told Eleanor about his daughter's dreams of becoming a doctor, about how proud he was of her determination and kindness. Eleanor smiled warmly and said she could see where his daughter got her good heart from. She told Marcus that his daughter was lucky to have a father who modeled such genuine compassion. The conversation shifted as Eleanor asked Marcus about his life, his dreams, and his struggles. She wanted to know about his work at the community center, about what had led him to that job and what he hoped for his future. Marcus found himself opening up in a way he rarely did with anyone. He talked about losing his wife to cancer 8 years ago, about the loneliness that still crept in on quiet nights. He spoke about the pride he took in his work, even though others might look down on being a janitor. He explained that he found dignity in doing any job well and in treating every person he met with respect. Eleanor's eyes shone with admiration as Marcus spoke. She told him that he embodied the kind of character that society desperately needed more of in the world. She said that people like him, who maintained their integrity and kindness regardless of their circumstances, were the true measure of humanity's worth. Her words made Marcus feel seen and valued in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He had spent so long being invisible, just like Eleanor had been during her time on the streets, that having someone truly recognize his worth felt almost overwhelming. As their meeting continued, Eleanor explained the practical details of the help she was offering. She had already spoken with her lawyers and financial advisors to set everything up properly. The money for Marcus's daughter would be transferred to a dedicated education account that very week. The monthly stipend for Marcus would begin immediately. She had also taken the liberty of setting up a meeting with a financial advisor who could help Marcus manage this unexpected change in his circumstances and plan for his future. Marcus felt his head spinning again. Just days ago he had been worried about losing work hours and struggling to pay bills. Now in the span of one afternoon his entire life had changed. He asked Eleanor if he could do anything to repay her generosity. Eleanor shook her head firmly and told him that his kindness that night had already given her something priceless. He had restored her hope in humanity. That was a debt she could never truly repay, which was why she wanted to do something meaningful for him. Before Marcus left the office, Eleanor made one request. She asked if he would be willing to meet with her son Richard in the coming weeks. She wanted Marcus to be present when she showed Richard the footage from her time on the streets. She felt that having Marcus there, hearing him speak about why he had helped a stranger, might have more impact than just showing the video alone. Marcus felt nervous about the idea of meeting a billionaire, but he agreed. If it might help Eleanor reconnect with her son, he was willing to do it. Eleanor walked Marcus to the elevator, and before he left, she gave him a hug. It was the kind of hug a mother gives, full of warmth and gratitude. She whispered a thank you one more time, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus hugged her back. This woman who had seemed so broken when he met her, but who he now understood was incredibly strong and purposeful. As the elevator doors closed, Marcus caught one last glimpse of Eleanor standing in the hallway, waving goodbye with tears streaming down her smiling face. The ride down felt surreal. Marcus stepped out into the lobby and walked through the revolving doors into the drizzling rain. He sat in his truck for several minutes, just breathing and trying to process everything that had happened. He looked at the folder Eleanor had given him, filled with documents that represented a completely different future than the one he had woken up to that morning. He thought about calling his daughter right away to tell her the news, but decided to wait until he got home. This was the kind of news that deserved to be shared properly. As Marcus drove through the city streets, he thought about the strange journey that had led to this moment. A simple act of kindness done without any thought of reward had somehow changed everything. He had given a sandwich and some crackers to a woman who looked hungry, and now his daughter's education was secured, and his own financial worries had vanished. It seemed impossible, like something from a movie rather than real life. Yet it was real, and it had happened because he had chosen to see another person's humanity when most others had looked away. 2 weeks after his meeting with Eleanor, Marcus found himself standing in front of the same downtown office building. But this time his nerves felt different. He wasn't confused or uncertain about why he was there. Eleanor had called him 3 days earlier to tell him that Richard had finally agreed to watch the footage from her time on the streets. She asked if Marcus would join them for the viewing and the conversation that would follow. Despite his anxiety about meeting someone so wealthy and powerful, Marcus had agreed without hesitation. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt longer this time. Marcus had used some of the money Eleanor had given him to buy a new suit, and he tugged at the collar nervously as the floors ticked by. He had never worn anything so expensive, and though it fit perfectly, he still felt like he was playing dress-up. When the elevator doors opened, the same receptionist from his previous visit greeted him warmly and led him to a different room, a large conference room with a massive table and comfortable chairs. Eleanor was already there, looking composed but tense. She stood when Marcus entered and greeted him with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He could see the worry behind her calm exterior. This meeting with her son carried enormous weight for her, and Marcus felt the responsibility of being part of it. She offered him coffee, which he accepted gratefully, needing something to do with his hands. As they waited, Eleanor made small talk, asking about his daughter and how she had reacted to the news about her education being paid for. Marcus told Eleanor about his daughter's reaction, how she had cried with joy and disbelief when he called her with the news. His daughter had wanted to know how such a miracle had happened, and Marcus had simply told her that he had helped someone who turned out to be in a position to help them in return. He didn't go into all the details about Eleanor's identity or her experiment. His daughter had been so grateful and relieved, and hearing the happiness in her voice had made everything feel even more real for Marcus. The conference room door opened, and a tall man in an expensive suit walked in. Richard was in his early 40s with the same eyes as his mother but with a harder expression. He moved with the confidence of someone used to being the most important person in any room. He barely glanced at Marcus before turning to his mother with an impatient look. He asked what this was all about, why she had insisted on this meeting with such urgency. His tone was brusque, almost dismissive, and Marcus could immediately see what Eleanor had meant about her son changing. Eleanor maintained her composure and gestured for Richard to sit down. She introduced Marcus, explaining that he was the man who had helped her during her time on the streets. Richard's eyes flicked to Marcus with mild curiosity, but there was no warmth in his gaze. He sat down at the head of the table and crossed his arms, clearly wanting to get through this meeting as quickly as possible. Eleanor moved to a laptop that was set up at the other end of the table and explained that she had something important to show him. She pressed play on the video, and the large screen on the wall came to life. The footage showed Eleanor in her homeless disguise, walking through various parts of the city. Marcus watched Richard's face as the video played. At first, he looked bored, occasionally checking his phone. But as the footage continued, showing his mother being ignored, shooed away, and treated with contempt by strangers, his expression began to shift. A small crease appeared between his eyebrows, and he leaned forward slightly, his phone forgotten in his hand. The video showed Eleanor approaching people for help, asking for food or directions to a shelter. Person after person walked past her without acknowledgement, as if she didn't exist. One scene showed a well-dressed woman pulling her child away from Eleanor with a look of disgust. Another showed a security guard telling Eleanor to move along, his hand resting on his belt in a subtle threat. The footage was difficult to watch, a stark documentation of how society treated its most vulnerable members. Then the scene changed to the community center. The camera, hidden in Eleanor's coat, showed her stumbling through the door and sitting on the bench. Marcus felt strange watching himself on screen, seeing the moment from Eleanor's perspective. On the video, he approached with the water and crackers, his face kind and concerned. Richard sat up straighter, watching intently. The footage captured their entire interaction, including Marcus giving Eleanor his own dinner and sitting with her, talking to her like a human being worthy of respect and dignity. When the video ended, the conference room fell silent. Richard sat back in his chair, his face pale. He looked at his mother, then at Marcus, then back at his mother. Eleanor turned off the laptop and moved to sit across from her son. Her voice was steady but emotional as she spoke. She told Richard that she had lived on the streets for 2 weeks, experiencing firsthand the cruelty and indifference that he so often dismissed when she brought up social issues. She asked him if he recognized the woman in that video as his mother. Richard's jaw clenched and he looked away. He asked why she had done something so dangerous and foolish. Eleanor's response was firm. She told him that she had done it because she was losing her son to greed and arrogance, and she needed him to understand what kind of world he was creating, with his callous business practices and his disregard for people he considered beneath him. She said that watching that video should have been like looking in a mirror, because the people who walked past her were no different than the man he had become. The words hit Richard hard. Marcus could see the impact in the way his shoulders tensed and his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Richard tried to defend himself, saying that business required tough decisions and that he couldn't run a successful company by being soft. Eleanor cut him off gently but firmly. She told him that there was a difference between making hard business decisions and losing basic human compassion. She reminded him of the boy he used to be, the one who cried when he saw homeless people and wanted to use his allowance to help them. Richard's facade began to crack. His voice was rough when he spoke again, admitting that he didn't know when he had changed, when success had become more important than everything else. He looked at Marcus with something that might have been shame or curiosity. He asked Marcus why he had helped a stranger when he clearly didn't have much to give himself. The question hung in the air, and Marcus felt both Eleanor and Richard waiting for his answer. Marcus took a moment to gather his thoughts. He spoke simply and honestly, telling Richard that he had helped Eleanor because she was a person in need, and that was reason enough. He explained that his late wife had always taught him that how you treat people when they can do nothing for you reveals your true character. He said that being kind didn't cost anything but indifference, and that choosing kindness made the world a little bit better, even if only in small ways. He told Richard that he had been poor his whole life, but that had never been an excuse to stop caring about others. Richard listened without interrupting, his expression softening as Marcus spoke. When Marcus finished, Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He apologized. He looked at his mother and told her he was sorry for becoming someone she didn't recognize, for dismissing her concerns and for treating people as disposable. His voice cracked slightly, revealing the emotion he was trying to keep under control. He admitted that watching that footage, seeing his own mother treated so poorly while a janitor showed her more compassion than he had shown anyone in years, had shaken something loose inside him. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. She reached across the table and took her son's hand. She told him that recognizing the problem was the first step, and that she believed he could become the kind man she had raised again. It wouldn't be easy, and it would require real change, not just words. But she had faith that the good person still existed somewhere inside him. Richard squeezed his mother's hand and nodded, looking more vulnerable than he probably had in years. Richard turned to Marcus with a different expression now, one of genuine respect. He thanked Marcus for helping his mother and for agreeing to be part of this difficult conversation. He said that Marcus had taught him something important without even trying, that real character wasn't about wealth or success, but about how you treated people when nobody was watching or when there was nothing to gain. He told Marcus that he wanted to learn from his example, to try to recapture some of the compassion he had lost along the way. The meeting lasted another hour as the three of them talked more openly. Richard asked Marcus about his life and work, actually listening to the answers instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. He asked his mother about her experience on the streets, hearing details that the video hadn't captured. The conversation was uncomfortable at times, but it felt real and important. Marcus watched as the relationship between mother and son began to thaw, as walls that had been built over years started to come down. Before they left, Richard made a proposal. He wanted to start a foundation focused on helping homeless individuals and supporting community workers like Marcus, who made a difference in people's lives. He asked if Eleanor and Marcus would be willing to help him develop it, to make sure it actually helped people rather than just making him feel better about himself. Eleanor agreed immediately, and Marcus, though overwhelmed, said he would help however he could. Richard seemed genuinely committed to the idea. writing down notes and already thinking about implementation. 6 months had passed since that emotional meeting in the conference room, and Marcus could hardly believe how much his life had transformed. He still worked at the community center, but now only because he wanted to, not because he needed the money. The work gave him purpose and kept him connected to the community he had served for so many years. His co-workers had noticed the change in him, the way he seemed lighter and happier, though he never fully explained the reason behind his improved circumstances. The foundation that Richard had proposed became a reality faster than anyone expected. Richard had thrown himself into the project with an intensity that surprised even his mother. He named it the Second Chance Foundation, and its mission was to provide support for homeless individuals and to recognize and reward community workers who showed exceptional compassion. Marcus and Eleanor served on the board of directors, and Marcus found himself in the strange position of attending meetings in boardrooms and helping make decisions about how to distribute millions of dollars. Richard had changed in ways that went beyond just starting a charitable foundation. He had implemented new policies at his company that improved working conditions and increased wages for lower-level employees. He started spending more time with his mother, having dinner with her at least once a week and actually listening when she spoke. Eleanor told Marcus privately that she had her son back, that the man she saw now reminded her of the boy she had raised. There were still rough edges, moments when old habits surfaced, but the transformation was real and ongoing. The foundation's first major initiative was opening 3 new homeless shelters in the city, each designed not just to provide temporary housing, but to help people get back on their feet with job training and counseling services. Marcus helped with the planning, using his knowledge from years of interacting with people in difficult situations. He suggested features that others might not have thought of, like individual lockers where residents could safely store their belongings, and common areas designed to feel welcoming rather than institutional. One of the shelters was named the Eleanor Williams Center for New Beginnings, honoring the experience that had started this entire journey. At the grand opening ceremony, Eleanor gave a speech about her time on the streets and what she had learned from it. She spoke about Marcus without using his name, describing the janitor who had shown her that kindness still existed in the world. Marcus stood in the back of the crowd, uncomfortable with the attention, but deeply moved by Eleanor's words and the tangible good that was coming from that one night in the community center. The foundation also established the Marcus Williams Award for Community Compassion, given annually to workers in service positions who went above and beyond to help others. When Eleanor told Marcus about the award, he had protested strongly, saying his name shouldn't be attached to anything so important. But Eleanor insisted, telling him that his example deserved to be celebrated and that the award would inspire others to follow his lead. The first year's award came with a $10,000 prize, and the ceremony received significant media attention. Marcus's daughter graduated from college that spring with honors, and Marcus sat in the audience at her graduation ceremony, with tears streaming down his face. She had been accepted to medical school and would start in the fall, all her expenses covered by the education fund Eleanor had established. After the ceremony, Marcus's daughter found him in the crowd and hugged him tightly. She told him that none of this would have been possible without him, without his years of sacrifice and his example of how to treat people with dignity and kindness. That evening, there was a small celebration dinner at a nice restaurant. Eleanor and Richard joined Marcus and his daughter, and it felt natural to have them there, like they had become an extended family of sorts. Richard and Marcus's daughter talked about medical innovations and healthcare access, and Marcus watched with pride as his daughter held her own in conversation with a billionaire. Richard seemed genuinely interested in her perspective, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes on his phone about issues she raised regarding healthcare for underserved communities. As the dinner wound down, Richard pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. He told Marcus that he had been thinking a lot about legacy lately, about what he would leave behind when he was gone. Before meeting Marcus, he realized his legacy would have been just money and business success, things that would be forgotten within a generation. But now he hoped his legacy would be the lives changed by the foundation and the example of how one person's transformation could inspire others. He credited Marcus with starting that transformation. Marcus felt humbled by Richard's words but reminded him that the real credit belonged to Eleanor for having the courage to show her son what he needed to see. Richard nodded and said that was true, but that without Marcus's kindness that night there would have been nothing positive for his mother to show him, just footage of cruelty and indifference. Marcus had been the light in the darkness, the proof that good people still existed. That proof had given Richard hope that he could change, that it wasn't too late to become better. Over the following months, Marcus found himself becoming something of a reluctant public figure. Local news programs wanted to interview him about the foundation and his role in its creation. He was invited to speak at schools and community events about the importance of kindness and service. He always felt awkward in these situations, insisting that he had just done what anyone should do. But people responded to his humility and his genuine nature, and his simple message about treating everyone with dignity resonated with audiences. Eleanor often accompanied Marcus to these speaking events, and together they told the story of their meeting from both perspectives. Eleanor would describe the desperation and invisibility she felt on the streets, and Marcus would explain his decision to help a stranger without hesitation. The story had power because it was real, and because it demonstrated how one person's simple act of kindness could ripple outward in unexpected ways, eventually touching thousands of lives through the foundation's work. The community center where Marcus worked received a significant grant from the foundation to expand its programs and services. His supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered the bad news about budget cuts just months earlier, now oversaw a thriving center with new computers, updated facilities, and additional staff. She pulled Marcus aside one day and told him that she didn't know what he had done to deserve such good fortune, but that he had certainly earned it through years of dedication and hard work. Marcus's life had changed in material ways that still sometimes felt surreal. He had moved to a nicer apartment, bought a reliable new car, and no longer lay awake at night worrying about money. But the changes that meant the most to him were different. He had formed meaningful friendships with Eleanor and Richard, relationships that crossed social boundaries that usually kept people in separate worlds. He had discovered that his simple philosophy of treating people with kindness had value beyond his own life, that it could inspire and influence others. One evening, almost a year after that first meeting with Eleanor, Marcus returned to the community center after attending a foundation board meeting. It was late and the building was mostly empty except for a few stragglers. As he walked through the lobby, he saw a young man sitting on one of the benches, looking lost and defeated. The man's clothes were dirty, and he had the hollow look of someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. Marcus felt a familiar tug in his chest and walked to the vending machines. He bought water, crackers, and a sandwich, then walked over to the young man and offered them with a gentle smile. The young man looked up with surprised, grateful eyes and accepted the food. Marcus sat down on the bench across from him, and they talked for a while. The young man shared that he had lost his job and his apartment, that he was trying to figure out his next steps. Marcus listened without judgment, then told him about the new homeless shelter a few blocks away, the one with job training programs and counseling services. As Marcus wrote down the address, he thought about the circle his life had made. He was back where it all started, helping a stranger in need, but now that simple act had so much more behind it. The shelter he was directing this young man to existed because of the night he had helped Eleanor. The foundation that funded it existed because he had chosen kindness over indifference, and somewhere, because of the ripple effects of these connected acts of compassion, other people were being helped by others who had been inspired by this story. The young man thanked Marcus and headed toward the shelter. Marcus watched him go, said a quiet prayer for his safety, and felt a deep sense of peace. He understood now what Eleanor had meant when she said that his kindness had been priceless. It wasn't about the money she had given him or the opportunities that had opened up. It was about the reminder that one person choosing to care, choosing to see another human being's worth, could genuinely change the world in ways both small and profound. Marcus finished his shift and drove home through the quiet city streets. He thought about his daughter starting medical school, about Eleanor having her son back, about Richard working to become a better man, about the hundreds of people who had been helped by the Foundation's programs. All of it traced back to a simple moment when he had given a sandwich to a hungry stranger. He had never sought recognition or reward, and yet both had found him. More importantly, he had learned that the kindness he had always practiced as a matter of principle actually mattered more than he had ever imagined. When Marcus arrived home, he found a message from his daughter telling him about her first day of medical school orientation. She wrote about the oath she would eventually take to serve all patients with compassion, regardless of their circumstances. She thanked him again for teaching her through his example that every person deserved to be treated with dignity. Marcus saved the message and sat quietly in his living room, overwhelmed with gratitude for the unexpected journey his life had taken. In the end, Marcus understood that he hadn't just helped a billionaire's mother that night at the community center. He had helped a human being in pain, and that was all that had mattered in the moment. The fact that his kindness had come back to him multiplied 1,000 times was extraordinary, but it didn't change the fundamental truth that had guided his action. We help each other not because of what we might receive in return, but because recognizing another person's humanity and responding with compassion is what makes us truly human ourselves. The story of the janitor and the billionaire's mother spread beyond their city, shared online and reported in newspapers across the country. It became a reminder that kindness still mattered in a world that often seemed too cynical and hard. People reached out to Marcus with their own stories of helping strangers or being helped when they needed it most. The message was clear. Compassion creates connections that transcend social barriers, and one act of genuine kindness can change not just individual lives, but the world itself, one person at a time.